On the last video, Iljin was walking with Beak Suzy, the high school queen, when Daejun came out of the blue and started fighting with him, simply because he wanted to. Daejun, sarcastically, asked him if his arms were okay, because from the last fight with the gangsters his arms had serious injuries. Then he began to take out his clothes, getting ready to fight, but when he turned, there were a lot of people looking at him, mainly girls. With that many people around, he couldn't just fight like that, since he had to play the good guy in front of everyone. Daejun, also seeing that, made out some excuses and left the place, what made the bald guy of the gang say it's a shame they wouldn't fight, and got aggressive. But his partner stopped him, saying it wasn't worth it to fight with such a crowd, and then they both leave, leaving Daejun and Beak Suzy alone again. She gets mad at Daejun and questioned him how he would fight both of the leaders of the second year at the same time, that it was too dangerous, because even though he was now so strong he wasn't an equal to the second or third year's leaders. Then she thanked him for saving her when those boys appeared out of nowhere, since he grabbed her from her waist to avoid she got hurt. Also, we see that, when she called his brother, she was actually pretending to call him in order to save the protagonist, to what he said he actually wanted to meet him. But she said he didn't have to think about that because there were some issues to be solved, like the first year guy's issue, who made an alliance to catch him. She leaves thinking about how imprudent he was, not because she was worried though. The protagonist, on the other hand, couldn't understand what was her deal. She would threaten him and then, suddenly, she was worried for him. The scene goes to the 4 classroom and we see Daejun was looking for our nerd. Turned out he liked him for how he fight. But even so, his money worries were bigger, so then he asked the president of the classroom his address, because he would make some money out of him. But the president said that they had to collect the money of the classroom next week. Even his friend warned him that if he did so, he would get in trouble. But he doesn't care and asked the president to play rock, paper, scissors to decide. He lost the first one but won the second, and also took the opportunity to punch the president a little, and then they continue playing. Sadly for the president. Meanwhile, Daejun is walking on the school thinking he would have loved punching one of the guys of the gang. But that anyway he would have to fight against Beak Suhyuk soon. Beak Suzy's brother. And not only that, Park Daejun isn't a normal person. He managed to bear the protagonist's punch pretty good. Now at night we see the rich nerd calling the gangs because they promised him they would take care of Daejun. But nothing has happened until now, and while he was around he wouldn't even be able to go to school. The only solution would be to find someone good enough to take care of him, and who could that person be? Of course, the protagonist. He plans to give some good money to him so he can take care of Daejun. But then someone unexpectedly appears, Daejun. He took that nerd's head and put it against a grid and asked how fun it was to run away. At the next day, on the first classroom, Minho is teaching his colleagues some math formulas and, on the other hand, Daejun is losing against his friend on an English quiz. The girl that was there even gives him some clues about the answer, telling the protagonist is the place where he promised to do jujutsu with her. It turns out the word was bed. Anyway, Park Daejun comes out of nowhere to the room, planning to have a little conversation with the protagonist. But before that, he needed a chair, so he sent the fatty guy away. Of course he wouldn't want to go, so he stands against him and Daejun offers him to play rock, paper and scissors to decide who would have the seat. The fat guy lost and, while he was getting ready to leave, he received a punch from Daejun, ending up on the floor. Daejun didn't like that but he couldn't fight because they're on the classroom. Since Daejun wasn't there to fight against him anyway, they started talking. He was there to play a game. He wanted to put some conditions to the next fight they'll have. Meanwhile, we see one of the bald guys of the gang is talking with Sungwa. They were talking about using an abandoned auditorium for an event that will happen soon. His colleague then asked about Daejun abilities, to what he answers he's very good since, when he fought against him, he was pretty much humiliated. They weren't equals. But that even so, it seemed like he wanted to hide those abilities, since he was never with his guard up. They compared him to Daejun that, on the other hand, has a special ability, his flexibility and elasticity. Thanks to that he has a great resistance, so big he's even used to jump from the second floor. He can avoid most of the damage he receives, instinctively, which is almost a gift, what explains why he didn't pass out when Daejun punched him. But he continues saying that, even though he has those abilities, his imprudent personality and bad emotional control can be detrimental to him. So, to believe Daejun could win on a fight is pretty much a bet. But it has to be considered he hasn't any technique to fight, even so he has a very good physical strength. Is then possible for someone like him to lose? Of course it is. It is yet to be seen if he can resist a fight against our protagonist, or not. Back with the protagonist and Daejun, who's addicted to gambling, offered to play a game to decide a condition for their next fight. The game would be based on flipping a coin on a slap, and the protagonist wins being great at it. Daejun asks for another chance and the protagonist decides to pretend Daejun won instead of having to play again. But he refuses to do that because, even though he's very bad at gambling, he has his honor. But, since he was there to force the protagonist to accept his conditions, he ended up accepting that offer and saying he better not regret it later and set the fight for next Friday. Minho wonders if it'll be okay to accept his conditions, since it could be a trap or something. But Daejun says that he should actually be grateful to him because he prepared a place for them to fight and all. Even so, he insists that it's weird to fight in front of the whole second year, that there must be some trap behind it, for sure. Then, while Daejin was getting out, the rich nerd takes the opportunity and comes into the room looking for someone called Kwon Daegun. Yes, he didn't even know the protagonist's name. The girl that was there with the protagonist corrected him, saying his name was Daejin, and then he asks him to please free him of Daejin. And that Daejin would do anyway, but that wasn't it. He didn't only want him to beat him up but also to lose against him. Yep, it turns out Daejin had a motivation to win that battle. He made a betting chart for the fight between them. But that's not the only reason. The last night, while Daejin was punching him, he asked how much he paid for the gangs to get rid of him, and since it was a very high one, Daejin decided to go there with the nerd to ask for the money since they didn't fulfill their part of the deal. But there wasn't anyone there, so instead of taking their money, Daejin resolves to take the rich nerd money to bet it on the battle so he could win and make a lot of money out of it. That's why he wants Daejin to lose. If he doesn't, he'll lose a lot. But what will Daejin win? Some people there got aggressive when they saw the nerd wanted him to do all that for nothing, so he asks him to teach him English on exchange. But how is he going to lose without being beaten up? That's the issue. Later we see the nerd and the protagonist practicing English. This one gives him an idea to bet it on the battle just like Daejin did, but he doesn't have money to do such a thing. But then, on a weird coincidence, they run into a moneylender, so the solution to his problem was now there. The scene changes and we're now on a park where Daejin is talking with his friends. Now that he had all that money, he could go back to his inversion. But there's an issue. He didn't only took some money from the nerd and also the moneylender, he also broke the school's rules, taking the money sooner than he should. His friends were worried about him for this, but he said that with higher risks, higher rewards. On the other hand, we see Daejin is in front of the moneylender's door but no one answered. When he was about to leave, a guy appeared asking if he wanted to ask for some money and how much he needed. Also, he asked his age. The protagonist got nervous and didn't know what to say, so the guy started to suspect. Feeling uncomfortable, he made out an excuse saying he had to take his clothes out of the clothesline. But the man wasn't a fool and wondered why was he worrying about the clothes if it wasn't even raining that day. The protagonist answered he would just leave anyway, but the man took him from behind and said he wasn't over yet and asked to what gang he belonged. The protagonist twisted his hand and said he just wanted to leave, and when he let him go, but the man took an astray and prepared to attack him. But the protagonist was as fool as strong and beat him up until he passed out. He took the opportunity to take a look to the documents that were there. He found a paper with the name of the bald of the gang and planned to take that page when he saw a photo there of the school's director. Then he heard some voices outside, so he decided to leave the place, but when he got to the door, he faced them. Those men asked who was he, and he answered he was there to talk to that man, but when he arrived he was sleeping and then he left. But of course he wouldn't believe that. When they tried to awake the men, he didn't even move an eye, so they went after the protagonist, who ran away as fast as possible until he got at a park where he decided to rest. Then he realized the stupid thing he had done, since his excuse was terrible and of course it wouldn't work. Then he takes his phone to see what the date of the fight was and realizes it'll be in only 2 days. Finally, the day of the battle arrived. Daejin is ready to give it all, with his arm fully healed now and trusted, saying the punches of the protagonist weren't nothing. Daejin's army are there too, the guys we saw in the park and also the rich nerd. They're all at the abandoned auditorium of the school where a man makes money out of students' fights. They arrived kind of soon since they were still preparing everything for the battle, so Daejin plans to warm up with the rich boy, but since that would probably make him passed out before the fight started, he resolves not to. Then the guys from the second year arrived and they all wonder where the protagonist is. Daejin was getting there with his entire group and one of his friends had a bag full of different kind of weapons. He asked him what he was doing with all that. The blonde guy of his group interrupted them, saying he had some information about how Daejin attacks and all, but the protagonist said he already knew about that he discovered it on the coins game. Then, something came up and the group would have to go there without the protagonist. Imagine them trying to explain that Daejin would be late to all of that, angry and ready to fight guys. Daejin wondered if he ran away because he was afraid, making the mood tense, but one of the bald of the gang said they could wait, that unforeseen could happen. Meanwhile, we see all of the gang's main characters were there, the number 3 Iljin, number 4 Do Sang-soo and the number 5 Kim Samuel. Then the guys from the second year arrived, the gang of the Fair Ties and his leader, Ma Kai-sok. He asked why all of that organization if it was only a fight between 2 freshmen, and a brave nerd said that Daejin wasn't any freshman. After a while, everyone was pissed because of the protagonist's delay, mainly Daejin, who was losing money, so he gets furious, saying if he doesn't come soon he'll destroy everyone from his group. Some others guys were getting impatient too, so they asked Minho to fight with Daejin to entertain them on the meantime. The protagonist's group is surprised by this, but Minho ended up accepting. But some other guy said that can't be, because Daejin can't waste his energy, and while they were discussing, someone finally arrived. Daejin turned full of fury, but it turned up it was an useless blonde boy that came to say something about not bet on Daejin. What just made him got even angrier, so he started attacking that guy. He first punched his stomach and then took his head, leaving him on the floor to kick his head after that. Everyone is in shock because of that, but the veterans are actually having fun, at least some of them came out happy of that. We see the protagonist was so late because he went to the moneylender's place to take those photos he saw the last time, and since he had to take care of the men of that house, it took him longer than expected. Back to the gym, we see Daejin ended with the blonde boy, but even so, he needed a lot more to really warm up. And finally, someone arrived. The protagonist was back. Daejin openly smiled with his arrival. And not only him but also his friends and the brave nerd from before. He apologized for the delay, and when he saw what he had done to that boy, he said he probably warmed up enough already. Then he threw his jacket to Daejin's face and beat up all of his friends within seconds. Everyone was surprised for this because they have never seen something like that before. Even Daejin got kind of scared. Daejin said that, since he got so delayed he had time to punch his friends. He would give the show everyone deserved and expected. Everyone watching said that this fight would be like a first look to how the fight for the top one of the first year's students will be, that if Daejin manages to survive, since Daejin is furious. The bald of the gang asked to take the bodies of Daejin's friends away because they'll be a burden for the battle. Daejin started talking with Daejin, saying he's an asshole but he likes him anyway. He explained he was like his toys he used to love so much he ended up destroying all of them. And after saying that he prepares to fight, he threw himself against the protagonist and started attacking him a lot, but Daejin dodged all of the punches, leaving him in shock. And there is an explanation for this. Minho explained, while watching the battle, that Daejin was only swinging his arms against him, and that the protagonist could have ended the fight a long time ago. Then the brave nerd from before joined the conversation and mentioned that maybe he was analyzing Daejin's punches because, as he remembers, on the fights 1 against 1 he saw of him, he always used to focus on dodging at the beginning, no matter who it was his opponent, and that after analyzing his enemy, the real fight would begin. Back to the battle. We see Daejin dodged one last punch and then he punched Daejin's chest, and after unbalancing him, he destroyed his face, leaving him on the floor. Daejin rejoined the battle, but now Daejin wouldn't let him attack. He unbalanced him and punched his face again. Daejin could barely keep attacking, but even so, he kept trying. The audience is amazed for what they're watching, and one of them said that, if they kept going like that, their fight would end soon, but Daejin wouldn't give up so easily. Daejin's resistance was good, but even if Daejin didn't have the chance to warm up before, now he was, so if he could do all that without the warm up, now would be Daejin's end. Daejin prepares to attack, but he's been already analyzed by his enemy, to what his movements were easy to figure out. Daejin doesn't know what's truly important, and as long as he loses his energy on the wrong things, the result will be always the same. Daejin started receiving punches, one after another, with no chances to get away from them. Everyone watching wonders if the battle was supposed to be so heavy like that. They didn't complain about it though. Meanwhile, the brave nerd wonders if that's all Daejin can do, and Minho, on the other hand, asks his partner if he remembers what Daejin said about analyzing Daejin on the coins game. He says he understood what that meant and that, seeing Daejin fighting now, it made sense. He's extremely strong, so when he hit the table the 4 coins fly, having 50% chances of turning them around, and that actually works. Until some point. That's because, on that game of the coin, not only the luck matters, but also the abilities with the look and controlling force. This explained what Daejin lost on that game, because he only uses his instincts, punching with ignorance. And that's happening on the battle. Daejin's using his instincts to fight. He doesn't analyze his opponent or anything, he only moves his arms from one place to another, waiting one of the punches will succeed. Even so, he is strong enough to win against someone with a good technique. But not here. Daejin knows exactly where the coins are, and he hits the table on the right place to rise them up. With the right look and the right force, Daejin is destroying Daejin. How Daejin got these abilities? We will finally discover the font of his power, the story of this past. That guy he once saved. He was who taught him the coins game, since this was the base for fighting. He taught him the position where he'd have to punch, the force applied, and everything. He taught everything the little Daejin needed to become the monster he is now. Back to the battle. We see how he tries and tries, but, unhappily, he's nothing compared to the protagonist. Some of the watchers wonder if it is valid to make bets on a fight like that, since Daejin couldn't even punch him once. And it is true. Daejin is strong, but Daejin is way stronger than he is, thanks to his resistance. The fight is great to see, but it's not so possible for Daejin to win. He's wondering why his punches can't connect. Daejin then asks him if he really liked him, because before he said he did, like he used to like his toys. Meanwhile, Suzy's hanging out with his friends when he heard, from the leader of the 5 classroom, that the protagonist was fighting at the school with all of the second year watching, to which she abruptly stands up to go there. The guy wonders why she's going there, and another boy there says that is clearly because she likes him. While Suzy is on her way there, she's thinking about how imprudent the protagonist is being, because acting so imprudent in front of the second year could be his end. These thoughts made her drop her umbrella on the middle of the rain to start running and get there faster. What she didn't know is that Daejin is far away from being in danger, not Daejin's case. This one was now punching his own face, making everyone think he got crazy, but the rich nerd explains that he's just checking his force, that on the coins game he did the same thing when he lost. When Daejin saw him doing that, he asked him if he was okay, and he answered he can't understand why he's the only one who's being punched because, on the coins game, the coins wouldn't turn all at the same time, but some of them would do it. Now, no matter how he punched, he couldn't punch him. He tries again, throwing himself against the protagonist to give him a mortal punch, but it doesn't work because Iljin kicks him to the floor. He stands up and tries again, but it doesn't work again. He kept trying, but the results were always the same. He would end up on the floor. Iljin punched him and Daejin saw an opening, so he tried to punch his face. He almost did it, but it wasn't enough. Daejin letting him on the floor again, this time with blood coming out of his mouth. He's now kind of unconscious and dreams. On his dreams, he's trying to hit a book on the table, but he can't do it, no matter what. Then the protagonist appears and says he'll help him to hit it. He takes his head and hits the table with it. Of course, this also happened on reality, where Daejin hit Daejin's face on the floor. After this, the protagonist says he finally warmed up, which means a lot it's about to happen to the group watching there. The scene changes to some Daejin's memories where he's at the gym using his phone. A professor came to him to complain about it, because while everyone was training he was using his phone. But he doesn't care, because he's on the investments website and trusted. He says he could destroy everyone there easily and with no training. The professor tells him that to invest without knowing anything was too risky, but Daejin trusted his intuition a lot, and mad with these commentaries, he called his professor to fight. Daejin could win against everyone, even with no technique. He was better than anyone, and having no technique, he would resolve everything with force, and it used to work. It had to work. When Daejin is about to go fight with some of the gang's group, Daejin suddenly stands up, with his face full of blood, saying the fight is just beginning. Everyone is surprised because, even after all the punches he received, he's still standing. Daejin tells him to shut up and to first clean his face before talking to him. Daejin now knows what he couldn't punch him. It's because he read his attack's pattern, so now he will attack faster than Daejin's thoughts. The bald of the gang see that. Indeed, the fight will begin just now. That's because, normally, the body limits its own capacity to avoid lesions, but once it gets to its limit can free speed and force to get to survive, exceeding its own limits. On this context, if Daejin's emotions concentrated only on winning, he could easily exceed his limits. Daejin throws himself against Daejin again, with all his forces, but Daejin stopped him, punching his face against the floor. No one saw that coming. They all thought Daejin could now give some good fight, but it wasn't the case. The bald said that kind of thing, where the weak get stronger out of the blue, would only happen on fiction. After this, Daejin talks to everyone saying they couldn't ask for any money from the collection because they're not gangsters as they think. They're only students, so they won't be more money out of the bet, and whoever went against this will end up like Daejin, or even worse. The bald king says Daejin doesn't know not even the half of the details of the big bet, that he may have heard a side of the story, but that there was a lot more in the middle. He said the bet helped students to have emotional stability, but Daejin doesn't care about that, and tells him to fight him if he doesn't agree with what he said, that he would punch him until his hair started growing. Everyone can't believe what he's saying because he's only from the first year, so they send him to shut up. And the leader of the fair ties says today's children don't have good manners, and that he can't take the money of the collect because of school's rules. But, since it's hard to explain with words, he'll show him fighting. Everyone gets up to teach him a lesson, that he can't just say silly things like that. Seeing this, Minho gets ready to help, but Daejin didn't need help. He defended himself with great attacks, destroying all of them at once. He was showing them who was the real king of the school. He has beaten almost the half of them already, when one of them suddenly took a chair to go against him, and when Minho was about to help someone came out of death, Daejin. He punched that guy's face, making everyone mad, sign he was going against his own friends, but he doesn't care and keeps punching all of them, who were attacking the protagonist. Daejin says he doesn't understand what happened, but that now, his body was extremely light, so he goes to attack Daejin with no fear, but with only one punch, Daejin counterattack and let him on the floor, again. Finally, Daejin passed out, so the fight with him was over, now he will be next. Meanwhile, we see there are some guys burning things, the photos of the president and the gangster, and between those photos, there's one of Daejin. Then, we see a guy very alike to Daejin take his picture for himself. Would be maybe his brother. Back to the school. We see everyone is amazed for how Daejin destroyed Daejin. The protagonist ordered one of his friends to take Daejin away. Meanwhile, someone starts shaking and sweating and saying something about someone called Astora. It was the bald of the gang, and his friend doesn't understand what's going on with him, but then he remembers. They met someone for the first time that drank a jar of whey all at once, as it was water and got some different powers. He kept repeating Astora until his friend slapped his face to bring him back, but it wouldn't really work. He was in shock. Because if before he has seen Astroa, he can't now see nothing else because the levels of Astroa weren't enough to get to Daejin's feats. While Daejin is there with everyone, Beak Suzy is running as fast as possible under the rain to get there, worried about him. But she doesn't know she's worried for nothing, because he destroyed everyone. After leaving the first group on the floor, he asked who will be next, but no one answers, so he chooses himself. He was about to do it when the director of the project calls him and asks what he's doing and where he is. He answers he's working on the project, but the director says that from now on, he'll do everything she ordered him to, and gives him his first order that's not revealed to us, and says she'll call later. We see she's really mad because he went to Ryo Sol's office or something like that. Because of her, Iljin would have to leave the fight sooner than he wished to and leaves, not before warning them that whoever who took the money of the school's collect scheduled for next week, he will find them and have no mercy on them. When he's leaving, he finds Beak Susie on the door, who was worried, and when she sees him, she asks him how is he okay, that it wasn't possible. When looks around behind him, she sees all of the bodies on the floor and wonders how is that possible. He ignores her questions and gives her his clothes because she's all wet. While he puts his jacket around her, she can almost imagine themselves getting married. She's all in love with him already. Then they leave and the leader of the fair ties, seeing them, wonders if they have some kind of relationship, and the brave nerd says that they could use their relationship to make Beak Susie's brother fight with Iljin. On the other hand, the protagonist was walking with his group when the rich nerd comes to him and says he's extremely happy for how Daejun ended up and that it was worth it to spend all of his money with the protagonist. Then, the group wonders if they all there. It turns out they forgot the blonde boy there, who ended up beaten on the floor at the auditorium. Daejun realizes this and sends them to look for him while he leaves because he has some things to do. Then we see that the chief of the gang arrived to the place where there were some people burning the pictures, saying they can't just rummage on others' life. The suspicious guy, the one that looks like the protagonist, says it was a personal issue for him, and then he leaves. In the meantime, Daejun was on the phone, searching for information about a guy who was sending him pictures of himself, kind of like a stalker, but even looking everywhere he can't find anything about him. Then he got into a room full of men who asked who he was, but he doesn't answer. One of them was about to punch him, so Daejun hit him against the wall. The rest of the men, surprised, prepared to fight, but then someone appears saying that guy, Daejun, was extremely dangerous. The men can't believe that because he seems like a normal student, but he says the danger was not on him but on himself, the one who's talking. It turned out, that guy similar to the protagonist was Park Hee-jun, the one who saved the protagonist won the past. They started talking and Park Hee-jun confessed he's the one who sent him the picture and the address at his phone. But that when he got there everyone was on the floor. He reveals he was messing with some stuff he shouldn't, and there he found some information about the protagonist, but that he was the only one who knew, so it was okay. Daejun didn't trust in him a lot, but anyway, he said he wouldn't make more questions about it, and then Park Hee-jun says the director has something to do with it, so he shouldn't trust her. The protagonist says he doesn't want to mess around with that stuff anymore, that he wants a normal life to graduate and go to college. To this the boy asks if he's actually good studying. With this questions, Daejun gets mad and says he doesn't want to see him in front of him ever again, and says he'll win against that guy, the fat one, on the English quiz. But still, a doubt stayed on his mind. Hee-jun said he deleted all of the information about him, but how did he know about the director? At the next day, Daejun met his group of friends and Minho waited him with a present, a pen. Daejun says he'll study a lot with it, but he says it is a weapon, not a real pen. Then they all go to play some baseball and the protagonist wonders if Minho is good at it, and it turned out he was. Daejun is impressed by his abilities and Minho says it's all thanks to an ability he created himself. Very simple theory, you don't have to work so hard, you just have to cross-eye it. Daejun asks why and he says he just has to try it, and he'll see, and explains that when you cross-eye you can see the same thing twice and that it can be applied to baseball. He can see two balls, so the chances to hit increases twice as well. On the other hand, his fat friend starts hitting the ball first with his stomach and then with his arm, explaining he's testing his resistance. Some girls that were there too, crazy for the protagonist, were planning to ask for Daejun's number, but they're interrupted when some boys get there, looking for some problems. But when they got closer and saw Minho, they felt terrified for him, knowing he was dangerous. One of them even tried to confront him, but his friend, afraid, tried to calm him down. It didn't work though. He insisted on confronting Minho, so his friend explained to him how dangerous he was in the fights he's been before. Then Daejun appears and this friend makes his final decision and decides to leave the place immediately, knowing the stories told about him. Moreover, at night, Daejun was running away from the moneylender because he owed him a lot of money. He was saying he'll pay, but they wouldn't believe him anymore. Even so, when he punches one of them and they see his strength, they get kind of scared. But then Hee-jun appears, only by perceiving he had the same attitude as the protagonist. Daejun realizes what awaits him. After being beat up, he's threatened. Since he didn't have any money, he'll use his body as payment. Daejun was never seen again at school, and this made the nerd's life very peaceful. However, another bully would appear to mess with them. To this, Daejun gave a mission to the rich nerd. He would have to find who that bully was, so he gathered all the other nerds that were victims on a meeting they called the Bullying Violence Committee. There, all the nerds save for Daejun would investigate this new bully, and whoever there who said a word against the protagonist was censured because, for them, he was the way of light on the middle of the storm. Unhappily, not all of the nerds could be a part of the meeting. The 7 and 8 classroom couldn't go because they had to train after their classes, and the 9 classroom, well, they didn't suffer bullying. Maybe because their chief was the brave nerd. Anyway, it's a relief the school is being so structured and peaceful like this, making the rich nerd feels good about it. At the next day, we see that on the 9 classroom there's a guy disturbing the rest of the class. Some guys gently asked him to stop, but he would just mock them because for him, they were useless and stupid. Then the nosy known girl comes to scene, complaining at him for ruining the study mood, what makes the guy furious and he starts getting aggressive. But the brave nerd arrives and we understand now why the 9 classroom has no bullies. He took him to a lonely place and started beating him, saying he couldn't act like that on his classroom. After resolving that problem, he makes a call to meet the last 3 remaining witches, he and 2 other leaders of the first year. First, Kwon Daegun, who had some theories about Iljin. He couldn't believe the protagonist thought he was so strong he could beat up the second-year students and even to catch whoever who took the money's collect of the school. On the other hand, Jae-seok can only listen, not being able to imagine Iljin's situation that's being talked around the entire school. However, the brave nerd confirms how strong he is, but that he overpassed the limit, saying they couldn't take the collect's money, making the entire school his enemy. Jae-seok they could think about him later, but that the issue now was think of a way to take the money without him knowing. Kwon Daegun asks him if he's afraid of him or what, and the brave nerd says he is afraid but that he already organized everything, and that the problem with that freshman will be solved before the collect. That he messed with something he shouldn't, the protection's money, and because he broke the school's rules, he'll get what he deserves, his destruction. Going back to what really matters, Iljin. He sent the rich nerd to have an eye on the 7 and 8 classrooms because even if they don't showed up on the meeting, bullying could be there too. While they're talking, Suzy comes to them to give back Iljin's jacket, and explains she cleaned because she stained it with makeup. Iljin's friend that was there, the one of his classroom, asks how she did that if the jacket was on her body. Suzy, not wanting to explain, gets mad with that comment and they both start staring at each other. Leaving that aside, Minho appears and asks Iljin if he's really going to punch whoever who takes the collect's money because, if it is, that would easily climb out the 3rd year, making things harder. But he thinks that's how it's better, since he has to take care of the situation as soon as possible to live a normal life again at the school. At the 2nd year classroom, we're introduced to a blonde guy called Cha Yeonwoo, who's trying some filters on the phone and saying he wanted to be an idol, and there are also some girls doing some TikTok dances. Kwon Daegun shows up looking for the president of the room, asking if he already collected the money, but this one asked if they were supposed to do it so soon. To this, Kwon Daegun said that even though some classrooms didn't collect the money, that didn't apply to his classroom, and asked if he wanted him to lose. The president, seeing the situation, automatically starts saying that it's not that, but it's interrupted by the chief, who throws a coke on him, sending him to collect the money for tomorrow and to send it to him. Meanwhile, Jae-seok is talking alone, saying that Kwon Daegun didn't see what Iljin can do and that, for that, he's so trusted. But he knows none of them could defeat him, so he starts wondering what would happen if he collects the money, but anyway, if he doesn't collect it, he's still screwed. A girl interrupted his thoughts, coming at him to show him a very cool jacket, saying it would look great on him, but that it was too expensive. However, she says they'll collect the money anyway, so money won't be an issue. This was enough to convince him about collecting the money and see how it goes. On the other hand, someone comes to talk with the brave nerd to tell him that if he's too busy, he can collect the money for him, but the nerd won't to collect any money. He knows pretty well he'll lose against Iljin, so he betrayed his partners, letting them collect everything, while he cleaned his hands from everything. After this, we see the president of the 4 years classroom went to see the rich nerd, who is making the nerd's alliance because of the protagonist. The rich nerd has invited him before, but he rejected the invitation before because of Kwon Daegun. But after this one forced him to take the money's collection, he decided to go see him. Meanwhile, we see Kwon Daegun is talking on the phone with someone, telling him he's already sent the money of the big collect and everything, but that there is a problem, the new student, but that he would take care of him as fast as possible. Then the brave nerd comes to him and asks who he's talking to, but he ignored the questions and said he already made the collect and that he would take care of Iljin soon. Meanwhile, on the 1st year classroom, the president of the 4 year is telling the rich nerd that Kwon Daegun collected the money, and then Iljin appears, and hearing that, he promises he'll beat him up. On the other hand, on the 8 classroom of the 1st year, there is this guy who wants to be an influencer, and the president of the 4 year with him, also some girls doing TikTok videos. The blonde guy asked the president which part of his face was prettier, and he answered all of them were. And then someone arrived, our protagonist, who was looking for Kwon Daegun. The girls dancing saw him and asked him to do some videos with them, but then they're interrupted because the blonde guy is punching the president because he provoked him to, hoping Iljin would save him. But because the girls are filming, he can't go fight for him just like that. So he goes and tries to convince the blonde boy to stop, but the girls started insulting him, so he got aggressive and took Iljin from his shirt collar. So Iljin tells him to calm down because acting like that, he looked like he was desperate for women's attention, and takes his hands out of him doing a key, telling him that if he stops everything will be alright for him, and no one would come out hurt. But when he heard the girl saying he was fragile and a poor boy, he spit at the protagonist, but he dodged it and ended up on the girl's shirt, which let his phone fall on the floor. Iljin took the opportunity, since there were no cameras to film him, he started punching him like he deserved it. And then the one the protagonist has been looking for joined the scene, Kwon Daegun, asking why he was punching him like that on his classroom. Iljin sees him and asks if he is Kwon Daegun, but he ignores the question, asking him, again, what he's doing there. He said he had an offer for him. Meanwhile, the rich nerd received an unexpected visit, the brave nerd, who was there because he heard it was a place where people who suffered bullying gathered, and asked to be a part of it. He doesn't really want him there, but since he knows he could beat him up within seconds, he accepts him. Back to the protagonist. He's on the classroom saying that he would give him another chance to give back the collect's money, and also that, since he did TikTok videos, it was better for him to accept his nice request. But even if he wanted to give the money back, he couldn't, because he spent all of it already. Iljin, even so, gives him the chance to save himself by gathering all the money for tomorrow, and then he leaves the room. But Kwon wouldn't let him. From his back, he attacked him and the protagonist managed to dodge it, but he took an opening to kick him, what the protagonist could barely defend himself. He kept attacking, throwing his arm against his face, but Iljin dodged it, of course. But that wasn't it. He then tries to kick his face, but he failed. For little, he's definitely not a normal guy. He keeps fighting him, kick after kick, what Iljin finds interesting because this is the funniest fight he had until now. But there is a problem. The girls are filming, and he has to avoid the camera's angle so they won't film him while he dodges the attacks. But at least he gets to use him as a barrier to hide himself from the cameras. So while the girls are trying to film him with no success, Kwon is trying to punch him, having the same results as them. Then, Iljin takes an opportunity and punches the blonde boy, throwing him against the girls so they can't film him. Now he just has to fight against Kwon, and since he needs to take care of that cute face, he decided to only hurt his body, hitting his costs and stomach, leaving him with no R. This was the last warning. He has until tomorrow to give back all the collect's money, and if he didn't, he wouldn't have mercy on his face and artist's career anymore. Everyone is amazed, seeing the protagonist is above the expectations. Now he just has to find Jae-sok, who's using the jacket he bought with the collect's money, charming the girl who recommended him to buy it. Then he receives the news about Kwon and gets extremely scared because of that, since he knows Iljin is now looking for him. Back with the nerds, we see the brave nerd is talking with the rich one about the future of the group, since he wants to become the leader of it. But he won't let him so easily since Iljin himself gave him that position. But with some simple threats he ended up giving him his position. Now in the 5th classroom, Jae-sok is making some excuses to go home because he's afraid of the protagonist. But when he opens the door he runs into Iljin, who tells him the lessons aren't over yet. Since he didn't want to be ashamed in front of the girl he likes, he asks Iljin to resolve the problem somewhere else, where they were alone, to talk in peace. And while they're walking he plans to attack him by surprise because maybe that would help him win, even if he was so strong. But realizing that wouldn't work against such a strong boy, he decides to give up and says to Iljin he would do whatever he wanted to. The first year issues were now solved. Now he has to go to the 7th classroom where the sport guys are, and the 9th where is the brave nerd. The biggest problem will be to find out who he has to fight because on the first years was easy. But if he went to the 2nd year asking if they collected the money they could say they did, or they could lie, fooling him. It would be easier if someone appeared to share the information with him, but who could that be? Meanwhile, we see the brave nerd is about to leave when suddenly Kwon got inside the room, abruptly and furious with the nerd, asking him what he has done. But he's calm and answered that if he kept talking so aggressively things will get complicated. But he doesn't care. The only thing he cares about is to know why he didn't do his part of their agreement. Then, Jae-sok also appears, to what the brave nerd asks if they're together or if they will be beaten by him separately. Kwon lost his mind. He would never forget him for his treason, so he throws himself at him, but when he's about to punch him, he receives a kick that leaves him on the floor. Even Jae-sok gets surprised for this, but before he could do anything, he receives his reward as well. He tries to counterattack, but the brave nerd took his arm and put him on the floor. Then he kicked Kwon out of the room, only to take him from his head back to it, and to keep punching him. Meanwhile, at the gym, some illegal activities are having place. Students' fights. Back to the 9th classroom. We see both Kwon and Jae-sok were totally defeated and that the brave nerd says he'll make of Iljin the leader of the school. Sooner that day, Iljin was going home when he realizes someone was following him. But since it was someone short, it wouldn't be a big problem for him. He plans a trap for him, and when this person got to a dead-end street he saw Iljin had disappeared. But he was actually behind him. It turned out it was the girl from his classroom. He asks her why was she following him and she answered that she saw someone very suspicious following him, so, worried, she followed to see who it was. But at some point that person disappeared and she kept behind him. He still didn't understand why she kept following him, and she made some excuses about wanting to thank him for saving her and more things like that. So he tells her that, if she wants to tell him something, she just has to send her a message, and gives her his number. Also, since it's getting dark, he offers to take her home. At night and at home, Iljin questioned the times he's been followed because, even if most of the time were children, when Park Hee-jun or the agency of his new job followed him, he didn't notice. They were outside his perception. Or when someone took a picture of him, he hadn't realized, so it would be complicated if things continue like that. Also, he still didn't know why Park Hee-jun came to him, but surely the reason it's related to the director of the school. Maybe trusting him isn't an option, so there's something he has to do, something related to the brave nerd. Now the problems aren't only inside the school, but also out of it. At the next day he thinks about the brave nerd, because the girl he took home yesterday told him since he got to her classroom, the bullying disappeared. so maybe he wasn't so bad as he imagined, and also he has a lot to do so he can't waste his time with little things. And then the brave nerd comes to the room where he was to tell him that, thanks to him, he could stop collecting the money, something he wanted a lot time ago. And that now he was there everything was simpler, so he wanted to help him to destroy the bullies of the school. Iljin trusted him, but then the rich nerd arrived, who didn't trust him at all. He tried to convince Iljin that it wasn't a good idea, but this one said that he had his doubts before but it was okay. After this, the brave nerd asked for a meeting with all of Iljin's friends to tell them he would take care of the bullies, and Minho asked why he was on charge of that. But Iljin interrupted him, saying he put it on charge because he can be a good ally in every situation. He could help them better than anyone because he knew a lot of bullies. He had his contacts, and also, he knew how the flow of money worked and go they have to catch. Because it doesn't matter, the nerd explains, how good your weapon is if you don't have a good look. So if Iljin has the weapon, he will be his eyes. The plan ends up with Baek Soo-hyuk of the 3rd year, Baek Suzy's brother. He's who makes the money works, but for some reason, he and another guy from the 3rd year are absent for the moment. So they decide to go for the plan B, to destroy the 2nd years. If they can stop the collect of the 2nd year, the 3rd year will be also affected. But before that, there's a very important thing to resolve on the 1st year, Koo Seong-hwa of the 7th class. Even if he didn't collect the money, he has to be defeated. It can seem like he doesn't good any bad, but he has a big obsession with power, what made him a demon. He made of the sport club a way to satisfy his own wishes, making students fight against each other, and that's because he wants information to analyze every detail of a battle, to use it for his formation. That's why, maybe, he can come after Iljin sooner or later, since on his last fight he overpassed any ability of a normal student, so Iljin will be perfect for him to get information to refine his knowledge. Meanwhile, we see Koo Seong-hwa is forcing a guy to finish the battle, even though he's too exhausted to continue, saying if he doesn't overpass his limits he would never get better. If you want to achieve something, you'll have to go beyond your limits. When the meeting of Iljin's was over, his friends were walking and the blonde guy said he still didn't like having the brave nerd as a boss, because he was very weird. Minho tries to calm his worries, but he won't like him anyway. At night, we see someone is visiting Max Seok, the chief of the gang. It turns out it was the brave nerd who visited him. Max Seok says he wanted to hire Baek Soo-hyuk, but he couldn't, because he was absent, and then he asks how the plans are going. The nerd answers they're going great and that soon he'll give the signal, because a storm will come soon, and they need to be prepared for it. On the other side of the city, we see Baek Suzy is talking on the phone with his brother, complaining because he's always absent lately. He says he let her some money on the table and when she took it she wonders where is all that money coming from, worried. At the next day at the gym, the students were fighting as usual, and they're getting better and better. The chief Koo is saying that even though they're getting better, they were normal students so they wouldn't improve more, and then he sends all of them to stop. They will now participate of a special study. Later, they all gathered on a construction place. None of them knew what was happening, but they knew if Koo Seong-hwa was behind it, there was probably a very important motive. Some people that were there watching sent a message to the new assessor of Iljin, the brave nerd, saying there was a crazy guy over the constructions. On another place close to there was having place a meeting of the Fair Ties gang with the brave nerd who, after receiving the message, had to leave it. Once out of it he called Iljin and told him to go to the constructions, and the rich nerd heard this and decided to tell Minho what happened. So Iljin's friends decide to stop playing and go there with Iljin. At night, the brave nerd comes to the construction place to look around and see what's going on there. Then he perceives something. There's a building with a great view. He concludes that place will be used to fight, so Seong-hwa can use those fights for his studies. We see that, while the students are fighting, Seong-hwa is watching everything with binoculars, studying the fights. When his assistant arrived and told him he planned everything, he let a guy come there to ask help to Iljin and everything. After a while, we see Iljin came there alone, on the phone talking with the brave nerd who said something came out so he'll be late, but that the fight was happening on the last floor, and that it was dangerous so he should wait for him. Of course the brave nerd lied, because he was watching everything from a high building. He suspected everything was planned by Seong-hwa so Iljin could fight with one of the students, and on that way he could improve his studies. Iljin finally got to the floor where the fight was happening and said they chose a good place to fight, since he liked places like that. They asked how he got there, but he says that's unimportant. That he wants to know where Seong-hwa is, but if they don't want to tell him, it's fine. He can destroy all of them to make him appear. What he doesn't know is Seong-hwa is doing all of that for his investigation. But to be truth, what is that investigation for? He explains that normal people can't reach their limits, so he selected some people for the fight he thinks are special. Only people with clear goals can become stronger. Who wants to become stronger will always overcome themselves more and more. To this, the assistant asks if being very strong isn't enough, and he says that's not what he wants, because they're only sacrifices for Iljin. The important is the information he'll get watching him fight. Information about abilities and becoming stronger, that's all he wants and all he needs. Then, someone appears behind them, saying boo. He was there to watch as well because he was a boxer who was there to learn from Iljin's mistakes and also his opponents.